Section titled Solving Proportions. This should be one of the easier sections in this chapter. So hopefully there won't be any problems with this one. It's nothing that you haven't already seen before in the previous math that you've taken. Going through the notes, the very first one says determine whether the ratios 7/8 and 49/56 form a proportion. Recall that proportions are two equal ratios. Ratios are just fractions. Numbers represented as parts to whole. So here are the two ratios. We have 7/8 and 49/56. In this case, one of the easiest ways to do this is to simplify the fraction. So the only fraction that's not simplified, obviously, is 49/56. So even if you were to just type in your calculator 49/56 and hit enter, and then have your calculator change that to a fraction if it doesn't already, you should come out with the fraction 7/8. So therefore, because they are equal, 7/8 is equal to 49/56, then yes, it is a proportion. So that's when you have two fractions and you're able to simplify them, that's how you figure out if there are two proportions. So that takes us to the next example. The next example said to use the cross products. Cross products is how you normally probably find out whether or not two fractions are proportions. Part A, and there's a typo in the notes, so make sure you correct it. It wants to know if 0.25 over 0.6 is going to be equal to 1.25 over 2. So make sure you correct the typo up here. It should be 0.6, not /6. Okay, to use cross products. It's also what's called cross multiplying because product is the answer to a multiplication problem. So you're going to multiply multiply it diagonally. So you're going to do 0.25 times 2. You'll make an x in the end, just like multiplication. So you do 2.5 or 0.25 times 2. Find out if it's equal to the other way. 0.6 times 1.25. 0.25 times 2 is 0.50. And then 1.25 times 0.6 gives me 0.75. So in this case, they're not equal, therefore, no, it is not a proportion. So you're going to do the exact same steps to solve for B. To solve example B. 4/5 and 16/20. Now you could use the exact same method that I showed you in the very first example, but just to show you it again with cross products, you're going to multiply to make an x. 4 times 20, which is 80, and then 5 times 16, which is also 80. So those, yes, do form a proportion. Okay, the next example throws in the variable, throws in the algebra part. In the next example, it says we want to solve for n. N over 12 equals 3/8. I realize you can use guess and check to figure out this answer, but if you didn't want to use guess and check and you wanted to actually solve this algebraically, then we can actually use the cross products just like we did to find out what the missing term is. It does say that they are proportions, they are equal. They already gave us that information. So now we're just going to use the cross products. I'm going to say 8 times n, which is 8n, equals 12 times 3, which is 36. And then this should look familiar. It should look like one of the how to solve equations problems. So then this is multiplication. To get rid of multiplication, we divide. And 36 divided by 8 is 4.5. So our answer in this case is 4.5. And you can always plug it back in and check, and it should come out to be 3/8. Last example is a word problem I'm going to run through. It talks about an atlas and the scales of a map, and it says Connecticut is 56 inches for every 41 miles. I'm sorry, 5 inches for every 41 miles. And because we're dealing with proportions and ratios, that's exactly how I'm going to set it up. So I've got 5 inches for every 41 miles. And then that's for Connecticut. And then it says the scale map for Texas is 5 inches for every 144 miles. Both pieces of information we need, because later on in the problem it says what are the distances in miles represented by 2 1/2 inches on each map. So to figure out, we're going to have 2 different answers for this type of problem, because it says for each map. So there are 2 different maps we're talking about, the Connecticut map and the Texas map. So basically you're going to set up 2 proportions to solve these. We have half of our proportion here, the other half of the other proportion there. So I'm going to do the Connecticut one first. When you set up any types of fractions with units, you need to make sure the units are aligned with one another. So the other piece of information it tells us is represented by 2 1/2 inches. Here I have inches represented on the top, so I'm going to have inches represented on the top for my second fraction. So I have inches aligned with inches, miles aligned with the unknown mileage that I still have to figure out. Because again, our question says, what is the distance in miles? Okay, so I can now use cross products, just as we've done before, to figure out what this answer is. So I'm going to do 5 times x is 5x, and then 41 times 2 1/2 is 102.5. Then again, this should look familiar, so we're going to divide by 5. My unknown mileage for Connecticut is 20.5 miles. So that's one of my answers. My other answer is for Texas. So I'm going to set up the exact same type of proportion, except for with the Texas fraction. So I've got 5 inches over 144 miles equals to my 2 1/2 inches over my unknown amount of miles. So we're going to solve it the same way. We're going to cross multiply once again. 5 times x is 5x equals 144 times 2 1/2, which gives me 360. Again, this should look familiar, so we're going to divide by 5 on both sides. And then my x should equal 72 miles. So the problem asked for the distance in miles represented by 2 1/2 inches on both maps. 2 1/2 inches on the Connecticut map is 20.5 miles. 2 1/2 inches on the Texas map is 72 miles.